What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Liberty Cast. I'm your host, Big E. So it seems that this Chinese coronavirus and the news surrounding it is going to be an evergreen topic on this show for the foreseeable future. But we're going to try and come at it from a constitutional and economic perspective, try and do some things that you're not seeing on the mainstream media every day. So we'll get into that. And believe it or not, there is other news going on, like the background check law for ammunition sales getting struck down in Commiefornia. So we'll get into that and how Becerra's appeal went. We will also address the shooting that took place in Canada and how they're reacting, which is about how you'd expect. And AOC proves yet again how smart she is not. We will get into all of that and much more straight ahead. There's an aspect of the situation that I've been talking about a lot, and you know this if you've listened to the show for any length of time. I've been talking about it a lot, engaged on social media with a number of people on this topic, because I think that it is of utmost importance. There are a lot of people out there who are upset with the Americans that are out there protesting being subjected to stay-at-home orders. I describe that as totalitarian, and I am focused on the violation of our rights and civil liberties. And so many people are upset at these protesters for daring to use their First Amendment right to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances, not the least of which is being made to stay at home. A lot of people have been forced to close their business. And as a result, a lot of people have lost jobs. Some businesses may never reopen. And the arguments I keep hearing from the people who are upset about the protesters are all emotional. None of them are based on any science, any reliable data. The decisions that put this country on lockdown and ground the economy to a halt, none of it was based on the analysis of any reliable data of any kind. I mean, China's data, as we covered before, was completely fictitious. And if you look at Worldometer, do you really think they only had 12 new cases, 4,232 deaths out of 82,716 total cases? Do we really think that in a country of 1.4 billion people, they've only had 83,000 cases? Come on. So the powers that be got some scary projections, told everyone they were doing this for our own good. As it turns out, it is doing no one any good. Now, since we've had time to actually compile and examine data, researchers have actually found that the virus has spread farther and faster than any of us thought. And Commiefornia seems to be on its way to a herd immunity. Now, how could that possibly have happened? Well, they didn't know it was circulating and hadn't been told to stay at home, so people were exposed. People got mild colds or mild cases of what they thought was the flu, got over it, and now they have antibodies. I mean, a lot of those people never even bothered going to a doctor. They went to CVS and got some nasal spray and kept it moving. So that seems to undercut the notion that we need to be under house arrest. I mean, just look at the Worldometer numbers and look at the states that don't have lockdown orders. States like Nebraska, Utah, Oklahoma, North and South Dakota. They're all at or below the national average for infections, hospitalizations, and deaths. Sweden, which has a similar population to Michigan, which is on a total lockdown thanks to that wannabe dictator Gretchen Whitmer. I shouldn't even say wannabe, but we'll get into that. We'll get into that later. But Sweden, with a similar population to Michigan, is lower in every metric on Worldometer. Fewer cases, fewer deaths, fewer new deaths, fewer deaths per million. So that comparison alone blows the narrative that we need to shut everything down out of the water, because Sweden famously is not under any such lockdown. They've limited public gatherings. That's pretty much the extent of their reaction. Movie theaters are still open. And yes, movie theaters are still open, but people have been smart enough to not go. Their revenue is down 98%. So, I mean, come on. But then when you add in variables and adjust for population density, age, population diversity, the numbers throughout the states between those that have lockdown orders and those that don't remain remarkably consistent. The states that don't have lockdown orders are either at or below the national average. So that leads me to conclude that the lockdown is not helping and may even be having a negative impact. But getting back to the discussions that I've been having online with friends and people in various groups, the people who are upset with the protesters, like I said before, have all these emotional arguments. I'm going to share with you some of the best ones that I heard, and also my responses to those emotional arguments. I'm at risk. I have an underlying condition, so I'm staying home. So that means they should stay home too. Or they don't have a right to endanger people's health or safety. They're engaging in criminal activity. Okay. At least they'll be alive to start over once this whole thing is done. Wow. That one was a doozy. Or how about this one? It's heartless and people protesting don't care about other people. Or people won't take precautions if we're allowed to reopen. The governor, the mayor, the sheriff, they're just trying to keep people safe. And it goes on. The ridiculousness just goes on. But here's the thing. Looking at this through a constitutional lens, which is what we should all be doing, looking at it from a perspective of liberty, if you're at higher risk, by all means, stay home. If your family is at higher risk, take all of the required precautions. And if you love your family, you'll do that. But engaging in your First Amendment rights, even without a mask or other PPE, is not criminally negligent. If you have the virus and are walking around and knowingly infecting people, that's one thing. But if Nancy Pelosi can get away with not wearing a mask, wiping her nose and touching the podium where every other representative is going to stand, wearing a mask while protesting, to me, is optional as far as I'm concerned. And the argument of at least they'll be alive, it was particularly galling. What about the business owner who opened a business 6 months ago with his life savings and now is out of business because the government told him he couldn't open, and then got denied the loan he was promised because Shake Shack and Ruth's Chris and Harvard got millions of dollars? He can no longer feed his family. He's humiliated, suffering from depression, and he kills himself. He's not alive to start over anymore, and his family is devastated. People will stop taking precautions if we're allowed to reopen. Well, the whole if we're allowed to reopen thing it just makes me throw up in my mouth a little bit. Because that's not how the Constitution works. Yes, it's true, people can be stupid. But when it comes to their loved ones who may be at higher risk, I'm going to guess that they're going to do the right thing. And if you're afraid of coming into contact with someone who is actually selfish and doesn't care, or has the virus, doesn't know it, and they're asymptomatic, then you don't have to go out. You can continue to self-quarantine. That's the beauty of what was the America that I grew up in. And one of my favorites, the governor's just trying to keep people safe. They're making tough decisions. These leftist governors are proving a point we've made here a lot. which is that the left's only goal is to amass power. The state legislature in Michigan met last week to draft some legislation to put some limits on the power of the governor, because this one has completely and blatantly overstepped her authority. And check out her reaction to this.
The political conversation that is happening in the Capitol right now is not something that I'm spending a lot of energy on, because I'll tell you, every unnecessary trip out of the house, every unnecessary close contact with another person threatens to continue spreading COVID-19. I find it odd that the legislature has chosen to congregate against all the best practices, against the spirit of the stay home, stay safe order, where the vast majority of their constituents are observing these important actions. With regards to any of the blatantly political conversations about taking executive power away from my office, I'm just going to reiterate, I'm not going to sign any bill that takes authority away from me or from any future governor. The powers of the executive office are incredibly important, especially in times of crisis where lives are on the line. And I don't know that I've got much more to say on that.
There is so much wrong with what she said there, but we've already covered it. So we're just going to focus on her tyrannical actions. And people think I'm being hyperbolic or exaggerating when I call these people tyrants. I mean, the proof is in her own words. Now, our friend BZ over at SHR Media had a brilliant post on Facebook the other day that sums up what we've been saying all along, and I will distill it down to a lot of the points he made into one question, and I will pose that question right after this. So before the break, I told you about our friend BZ, and he posted something on Facebook that was absolutely brilliant. And he posed a number of questions, but it can all be summed up, I think, for the most part, into this simple question. How many people do you think should sacrifice their lives, their livelihood, for the illusion of safety that these tyrants are spoon-feeding you? Whether it's because they lost their job or business or lost their home, or because they couldn't work and the government gave the loan to multi-million-dollar businesses and universities with endowments worth tens of billions of dollars. Or they succumbed to depression and committed suicide because they lost everything and couldn't provide for their family any longer. How many people? If you pose that question to somebody who you're having a similar discussion with, you're going to get one of three responses. You're either going to get a non-response response. They're just going to brush it off and ignore the question. Or you're going to get a response that says everybody needs to do this because it's for the collective good. And the third reaction you'll get, and it will be a very small percentage of people that will actually react this way, you'll get someone who will actually think about it and say, you know what? That's a good question. You're right. Not many people are going to react that way. But it's definitely a question that I think you should pose and make these people think. Because as I stated at the top of the show, they're reacting emotionally. They're reacting emotionally because either they're in a high-risk group, they have family or friends in high-risk groups, they know people who have been diagnosed with the disease. I know people who have had it. I know people who were recently diagnosed with it. Yes, it's a scary proposition, especially because these people have been in or are in a high-risk category. It's frightening for the family. I completely understand that. I was accused of being heartless. just because I want the business owner to be able to conduct business and provide for his family doesn't mean that I want people with underlying conditions and elderly people to die if they get the disease. To suggest that is just ridiculous. All right, we're going to move on because there are a few other topics I want to get to, and we will be talking about this topic for the foreseeable future. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So we actually thought we had a victory in Commiefornia when U.S. District Court Judge Robert Benitez issued an injunction against the state of Commiefornia, preventing them from enforcing the law requiring background checks for ammunition sales. The case is Rhodey versus Becerra. Kim Rhodey, she's the Olympic shooter. Ridiculously amazing shot, by the way. Watching her shoot is just awe-inspiring. So obviously, she goes through a ton of ammunition, and that background check is an undue burden. It makes no sense to background check ammo. Criminals don't do background checks. They're not going to go to a store to get their ammo. They're going to steal it. They're going to buy it from the dealers they get their guns from. They'll press their own. It's stupid. In fact, I'm going to read for you a portion of Benitez's order because it sums it up perfectly. From Benitez's order, quote, "First, criminals, tyrants, and terrorists don't do background checks. The background check experiment defies common sense while unduly and severely burdening the Second Amendment rights of every responsible gun-owning citizen desiring to lawfully buy ammunition. Second, the implementing regulations systematically prohibit or deter an untold number of law-abiding California citizen residents from undergoing the required background checks. Third, in the 7 months since the implementation, the standard background check rejected citizen residents who are not prohibited persons approximately 16.4% of the time. Fourth, the ammunition anti-importation laws directly violate the federal Dormant Commerce Clause." End quote. The anti-importation law means that if you're in Commiefornia, you cannot go to Arizona or Nevada or Oregon to buy ammunition. The town of Needles, California, we talked about this last year. They were one of the first towns in Commiefornia to declare themselves a Second Amendment sanctuary. Now, this town borders Arizona. There's a gun shop in Arizona less than 15 miles from Needles. But this law prohibits residents of Needles from crossing the state line to purchase ammo there. The nearest gun store where they can purchase ammo in California is 130 miles away. That's kind of the definition of infringement. But of course, the Attorney General Javier Becerra, he went to the Ninth Circuit and got a stay on appeal. He first addressed Robert Benitez to try and get a stay on it. Of course, Benitez said no. He went to the Ninth Circuit, which, even though the Ninth Circuit is coming around and they've made some favorable decisions of late, there's still some remnants of that old Ninth Circus that inexplicably granted this stay. In his appeal, Becerra argued that public safety would be negatively impacted if they were no longer allowed to conduct background checks on ammunition sales. If that were true, then Benitez never would have issued the stay. If he could prove that public safety is in jeopardy by not conducting background checks on sales of ammunition, if that were true, Judge Benitez never would have issued the stay while the case of Rhodey versus Becerra is litigated. Never would have happened. Just so I have a really, really hard time wrapping my mind around the thought processes of leftists. I try to, because I really try to think about things the way they do, so that I can come up with good counter arguments. It's hard. It's hard because it goes so against the way I think. Logic, data, facts. None of that goes into the equation when you're talking to a leftist. None of it. Anyway, hopefully this gets resolved in our favor quickly, because I'm just glad I don't live in Commiefornia. All right, let's just press on, shall we? Last week, there was a mass shooting in Canada, in Nova Scotia. And that mass shooting proved that gun control doesn't work and Canadian citizens have no rights. Okay, no, that's imprecise and obviously hyperbolic. They have rights. They have rights as any human being has rights. And here in the United States, we have a constitution that protects those rights. For now, anyway. But Canada's government does not. There's no such thing as a First Amendment in Canada. There's no such thing as a Second Amendment in Canada. They have human rights tribunals where comedians are tried and fined for telling jokes. One comedian was fined $42,000 for telling a joke that was admittedly offensive about a boy with a disease. It was distasteful, no doubt. Some of the funniest jokes, though, are distasteful and offensive. And our First Amendment protects us from being prosecuted for telling offensive jokes or saying things that are unseemly. It doesn't allow you to make threats. It doesn't allow you to incite violence, but everything else is protected. The Second Amendment guarantees our right to protect ourselves against physical threats. Now, this shooting in Canada, along with every other mass shooting in places like Commiefornia, proves that gun control doesn't work. The shooter lived in Canada, where there are a number of hurdles that you have to overcome before you can purchase a firearm. You have to take a safety and proficiency course. You have to apply for a permit. You have to pass a background check, a criminal background check. Your spouse has to be notified. And if all of that comes back clean, then you can get your gun. This shooter didn't do any of that. According to the RCMP, he did not have the required certificate to be able to legally purchase a gun in Canada.
We have a fairly good idea, at least in Canada, that he did not have an FAC, Firearms Acquisition Certificate.
Color me surprised that gun control did not prevent a mass shooting. But of course, since the already draconian laws didn't work, the answer is obviously more laws.
But in regards to gun control, we took very serious commitments in the election campaign and have moved forward and are moving forward on them to ensure that we're strengthening gun control in this country. I can say that we were on the verge of introducing legislation to ban assault-style weapons across this country. It was interrupted when the pandemic caused Parliament to be suspended. But we have every intention of moving forward on that measure and potentially other measures when the Parliament returns.
There is some speculation that he may have gotten some of his guns here in the States. We have yet to find out whether that's true or just speculation. Regardless, they were illegal in Canada. But I bet if the process to legally own guns in Canada was not so onerous, most of those 22 victims would still be alive. But that's not, that wouldn't be the happy ending that it would be here in the States. Because whoever stopped the threat in Canada would be under arrest. Because if you use a gun in self-defense in Canada, you will be arrested, charged with a crime, and put on trial. Now, the odds are usually in your favor if you're truly defending yourself. But still, I am so glad that I do not live in Canada. Between the weather and the gun laws, I barely want to visit there anymore, let alone live there. They have every gun control measure in place that the leftists in this country would love to have, and those laws still didn't prevent this tragedy. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to get you out of here with a couple of really ridiculous stories. See you on the other side. Alexandria Occasional-Cortex is at it again. AOC actually, you know what? Just listen to this.
I think when we talk about this idea of reopening society, only in America does the president, when the president tweets about liberation, does he mean go back to work? When we, have this discussion about going back or reopening, I think a lot of people should just say, no, we're not going back to that. We're not going back to working 70-hour weeks just so that we could put food on the table and not even feel any sort of semblance of security in our lives.
She actually equates liberation with not going back to work. This goes against the American ethos. Part of what it means to be an American is to be self-reliant, and working is part of that. She wants to reignite Obama's fundamental transformation of America. This is the same woman who celebrated oil prices going into the negative and all of those people being out of work by saying, you absolutely love to see it. When somebody put out a tweet that oil prices were at negative values. She said, you absolutely love to see it. This, along with record low interest rates, means that it's the right time for a worker-led, massive investment in green infrastructure to save our planet. Cough. This is the same woman that put in her Green New Deal proposal a provision to provide income for those unwilling to work. And now she thinks that working 70 hours a week is somehow oppressive. That being able to work and provide for your family without the government being involved is not liberation. I mean, this woman is dumb as a box of hair. And if you want to be successful at anything, you're going to have to work at least 70 hours a week. And the most successful people tend to work 80 to 100. She probably barely works 20 in her current position as United States representative. I mean, they probably barely work 30 when they're in session anyway. And come on. I doubt she's worked 70 hours at anything more than being a moron. All right, really quick before we get you out of here. I'm sure you've heard the stories. I'm sure you've seen the memes. I'm sure people have been tweeting at you and posting Facebook messages about injecting themselves with disinfectant, and Trump needs to be the first one to do it. He never said that.
So supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. So we'll see. But the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful.
He never suggested that anyone inject themselves with anything. His words were chosen poorly, yes. That goes without saying. Because whenever he chooses words poorly, stuff like this happens. You would think that after all this time he would try to be a little more precise when he speaks, because the leftist media is laying in wait to pounce on anything he says that is not perfectly stated. And even if it is, they will find some way to parse it, to twist it, to mean something that he didn't actually say. And he should know this. Because it does get tedious having to explain what he means half the time, or having to at least refute the narrative that they're trying to feed us and trying to tell us he meant one thing when we know he did not mean that one thing. I coined the term a while back, libsplaining. And I came up with that when I kept seeing people like Juan Williams and Kirsten Powers, Chris Hahn, Rachel Maddow, Mark Lamont Hill, Jason Nichols get on TV and try to explain what Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or any of the leftist politicians were saying that was so completely outrageous, and they would try to spin it into something that it clearly wasn't. On the flip side of that, we have Trumpsplaining, where we are trying to undo the damage that the leftist media is doing by twisting his poorly chosen words. The difference between the two is simple. In libsplaining, 9 times out of 10, they said exactly what they meant. There was no ambiguity in the words that they chose. With Trump, there's always some ambiguity. There's always some confusion. It's unforced errors he brings on himself. There's no other way to say it. But you know, at the end of the day, what he's doing and what he's saying are diametrically opposed to what the left is saying. And so even though Trumpsplaining and libsplaining may sound like they're the same thing, they are absolutely not the same thing. It is tedious, but I live with it, because for as often as he speaks somewhat carelessly, the leftist media they can't just let his words hang there. They can't let his words be the story. They have to twist it into something that it's not, which proves that they're not very smart. Because if they just let his words be the story, we wouldn't be talking about how they twist the words. That wouldn't be the narrative. We would be trying to Trumpsplain. But when they do this, when they try to twist something, when they try to twist what he says so outrageously, the media behavior is what becomes the story. He gives them the ammunition. Again, I'm not trying to explain that away. He gives them the ammunition regularly. But as much as I said he should learn at this point, you would think the media would learn too, that they always end up looking foolish when they could just let the words speak for themselves, because they wouldn't have half the credibility issues that they do if they would just do that. Because then when you read the stories that they write, when you read the stories where they said he told people to inject themselves with disinfectant or drink bleach or whatever the case may be, when you read those stories and then you actually listen to what he said, anyone with half a brain can listen to that and say, yeah, it was kind of stupid what he said, But what he actually said isn't what you told us. So how can anyone trust the leftist media when they do stuff like that? All right, folks, that is our show. There was a lot more I wanted to get to, but unfortunately, we're out of time. So I want to thank you all for spending this time with me. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, please check us out on your favorite podcast platform. Like us, subscribe, leave a review. Let us know what you think. You can check us out on the website, thelibertycast.net. The homepage now has all the shows. There was a minor technical difficulty, and the last week's show is not up on the website yet. It will be. Hopefully we'll get that ironed out and we can get last week's and this week's show posted. But we're also on social media. Check us out. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Parlay at The Liberty Cast on all 4 platforms. And you can also find us on therightway.site. The Right Way, all spelled out, .site. Check us out there. There's a lot of great content there as well. But again, folks, thank you all for listening. I really appreciate you spending this time. And until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.